Dad, Please Don't Go to Australia by Nicholas Leonard. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Dylan Thomas.
Dad, please don't go to Australia,
Alexander Darmody said to his dad on one hot spring night in 2013 in Peabody, Massachusetts. Alexander was 12 and had been unable to sleep on account of what he learned in school that day in social studies. Australia, its arid badlands, great whites that sawed off people's arms, crocodiles, giant spiders, and everything being upside down. An anxious child, he somehow tricked himself into worrying that his father was going to Australia. It made him cry and sweat in his bed until he couldn't take it any more and started letting out kitten-like squeaks while crying with the hopes that it would attract his parents, specifically his father, Marlin Darmody. Marlin and Coral Darmody entered their son's room together, turning on the lamp and casting a dim orange light on his many boxes of Legos. The lamp was dim because it had been the same bulb since Alexander was 3 years old, and the lampshade was caked in dust, which hindered the light even more. Alexander's crayon renditions of his favorite Pokemon decked the wall beside his blue bed. Pikachu, Rayquaza, Lucario, Garchomp. He was a Sinnoh kid. They stood in the doorway, Coral with her blonde hair tied back in a sloppy ponytail, in pink striped shorts and a baggy moth-eaten t-shirt. Marlin with nothing but a white t-shirt and a baggy pair of whitey tighties. He had stubble on his face and smelled like sweat, the grease of an Italian sub. Coral folded her arms. "What is it, buddy?" Marlin asked.
Dad, please don't go to Australia,
Alexander squeaked, tears on his cheeks like streaks of rainwater on a castle step in a fairy tale. His little fingers were curled on his comforter as though he was waiting for an excuse to throw it over his head.
But Pa,
Coral cooed, rubbing her arms.
I don't understand. You used to watch Steve Irwin all the time.
Marlin looked at his wife. "I don't think he's afraid of Australians, honey. I got this. Go back to bed." Coral stepped forward to give Alexander a kiss first before going back to bed. Marlin stepped forward. "Alexander," he sat down on the bed. "Why are you worried about that, buddy?"
We learned about it in school.
"What did you learn?"
It's far away,"
Alexander squeaked. "Do you know how far away?" his dad asked and explained, after Alexander shook his head, blonde bowl cut rippling. "It's at least 11,000 miles away." "I'll never go that far away from you, Alexander." Alexander's face scrunched up, a little agitated and tired, Marlin refrained from rolling his eyes.
I'm scared of you.
Alexander croaked, stopping to cry because he wasn't really quite sure what he was afraid of yet.
Getting hurt or being far away.
A string of thoughts conveyed through Marlin's mind before he patted the bed. Get up. Alexander sniffled. I want to take you for a walk, Marlin said, standing. Come on. Alexander stared up at his father. It was after midnight according to his digital clock on his bedstand. He had never been outside the house that late before. Come on, Marlin coached. I got you. It's all right. Alexander reluctantly slipped out of bed, also in whitey tighties like his father. Come on, put some pants on. Marlin stayed standing while Alexander got out a pair of green flannel pajama pants, then reached for a pair of socks. You won't need your sneakers. We won't be too long, Marlin said, cracking a smile after seeing the confusion like a rite of passage on his son's face. We'll walk barefoot together. Marlin hopped into a pair of sweatpants and walked out of the house with his son. It had been so sticky inside the house that it felt cool stepping out. Even the cracked pavement in the driveway cooled their souls. Every house on the suburban street had its lights off, and all the telephone poles reached out to each other in a harmonious embrace, wire to wire, arm to arm. The sky was so grey like the color of a werewolf's fur, but blue around the moon. Alexander marveled up at the big yellow moon, big and appetizing, like a saucer of milk, while his father led him out into the middle of the street, the pavement being even more cracked and bumpy there. It all smelled cold, refreshing, like smelling a glass of cold water. There's really no smell but a kind of phantom smell. Even the woolly dress of a pine tree seemed blue in the night. Alexander didn't recognize the sidewalks he walked to get to the bus stop in the mornings. He would have been terrified had it not been for his father. They came to a stop in the middle of the street where crickets could be heard from all directions. Look at that! Can you believe they walked on that? Marlin said when he caught his son marveling up at the moon. Do you know who walked on that?
Neil Armstrong.
Alexander couldn't see his father's smile in the darkness. Neither knew it, but the moon was interfering with their production of melatonin. Their faces, candle wax, waiting for sunrise. Good. You pay attention in school. You know, I was born the year they landed up there.
1969,
Alexander remembered. Uh-huh. You know how far away it is?
No.
Almost 250,000 miles. Alexander let out one long hoot like an owl. Whoa! Marlin took a deep breath and became very serious, using his son's wonder as a kind of weak point to get sentimental. You know I wouldn't ever leave you. Nothing's gonna happen to me, so you don't have to worry about me, okay? We have a lot of time left together. I mean, you're not even done with middle school yet. I don't want you crying about me, because you don't have to.
You're not going to Australia?
No. If I was, I'd let you know, and I'm not. I don't want to be anywhere but here. In that house, he pointed behind him, with your mother, sister, and you. I love you guys. He paused and audibly breathed in through his nose. Fresh air. It's good, isn't it? Alexander's bowl cut moved in accordance with his head when he nodded. Wanna walk for a little and go back to bed? Marlin suggested, to which Alexander nodded.
Yeah.
See? I'm not going anywhere, buddy. I'm right beside you, he said, while escorting his son down the long spotlight of yellow moonlight. Crickets cementing the memory. So they walked around the neighborhood that night. Many different separate choirs of bugs sang. Alexander swore he thought he saw a firefly, but it didn't glow enough to cement itself in his memory. Alexander might have asked it because the telephone wires seemed so spider-like in the darkness, but he didn't really know exactly why he asked it. Maybe he asked just because he wanted to hear his dad teach him something.
Dad? But what do the telephone poles do?
Hold up the wires, buddy.
What do the wires do?
Marlin looked up at the same slinking telephone wires Alexander had been looking up at. Well, they said signals. They send them really fast, too. You know that computer we have in the basement?
Yes.
They keep that working. That's how we're able to use the computer and things like TV and the phone. They keep us all connected. See? The whole neighborhood's strung up with them, Marlin explained. I guess you could say it's once integral to keeping all of this functioning.
So it just gives us electricity?
For some things, yeah, sure. They walked on, and Alexander's fear receded. Marlin kept to his promise, and Alexander lost his bowl cut a year after their midnight walk, when he was diagnosed with cancer. They caught it very early, so it wasn't a dire situation, but it was scary to the Darmodis. And it did require a lot of overnight stays in Boston children's care centers throughout the state. While he still had his Beatles hairdo, he would hear his mother sniffling into tissues, while his father mumbled something to her. The only person who seemed the bravest was Marlin. He put his editorial job at the Peabody Weekly News in jeopardy to spend every waking moment and every sleeping moment with his son. It was Marlin who stayed overnight in the hospitals with him. It was Marlin who went to his middle school to receive Alexander's homework assignments, and it was Marlin who did Alexander's homework for him, having learned how to replicate his son's handwriting, which was easy because they wrote certain letters in the same certain ways. If Alexander couldn't fall asleep, Marlin couldn't fall asleep, and when Alexander was asleep, it was rare for Marlin to be asleep. They swallowed the same cold cafeteria food together. The nurses who came in and out of the room were quietly astonished about the watchful energy Marlin Darmody exuded, though it wasn't uncommon. He didn't go anywhere. Stubble formed on his face more than it had before. He had a way of making the light apricot-colored stamps of exhaustion around his eyes seem like badges of loyalty. He went on marathons of sleep deprivation, his promise never wavering. But most importantly, Marlin made sure his son still loved. One day, while a team of doctors were in an exam room with them, while Marlin sat on a little chair and Alexander sat on a turquoise cot, Marlin pointed at the window and said, "Look, there's a fat, naked, hairy guy out there." All the doctors snapped their heads, and Alexander laughed, a sound that Cancer hated, a sound which made the monster inside him recoil. It said that there were earthquakes the day Jesus rose, and that was what it was like in Alexander's chest cavity when his father made him laugh. Cancerous cells, baffled Roman soldiers. The doctors didn't get the humor, but they didn't need to. The stone was rolled. Alexander laughed, and it made Marlin smirk. Marlin and Alexander didn't care how much it confused the other parents and patients that boarded the glass elevator in one of the hospitals. The glass elevator was in a chute of glass and outlooked the parking lot and street ahead. Alexander laughed as they went up and down, just continuously riding the glass elevator for no reason. They must have ridden it 40 times. It didn't matter whether it was a nurse, doctor, or family inside the elevator with them. They laughed and pressed the buttons, and Alexander forgot he had cancer. Medicine did most of the heavy lifting. But it might have been that glass elevator ride that defeated the cancer once and for all. And it ended. Childhood cancer receding like a fever dream. Marlin probably remembered it better than Alexander did. Alexander grew his hair back and got lots of hugs and kisses from family on his first cancer-free family gathering. And Marlin returned to the Peabody Weekly News with the clearest conscience of any man inside that building, walking back to his cubicle with the brevity of a man in the 40s returning from war. He wasn't going to talk about it. He didn't need to talk about it. He got the job done, and now he was ready to return to normalcy. He had the wonderful feeling of having had come back from somewhere obscure. But just like parents will never understand why their children develop cancer, Alexander would never understand why his dad lost his mind. It most likely started during COVID, but the symptoms were so minuscule and benign that they didn't warrant alarm from Alexander and Coral. Alexander had evolved away from the Wiggles and Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, though he was probably forced to after crying that day after kindergarten when his mother told him Steve had died. Marlin was evolving towards something. April 2020. They were watching House Hunters International, and the episode was set in Australia, displaying white beaches, high-rise apartment buildings that were so blue and white that they seemed to be from the future, and suburbs not too dissimilar from the Floridian neighborhoods. "Hey, we should go there sometime," Marlin suggested, while the tan brunette realtor was showing a dopey California surfer house number 2. "Oh no," Coral mused. "I wouldn't be able to stand the flight. It's gotta be 20 hours. "Ah, well," Marlin grunted. "What do you think, Al?" "What do I think?" Alexander said. "I mean, it looks cool. Maybe someday." "Maybe the two of you could take a father and son trip," Coral suggested. "I'll stay right here in America, thank you very much." Marlin gestured with the remote, pointing to the lush backyard on the television. "Come on, imagine waking up to that every day. Imagine waking up and seeing a dinosaur in your backyard." "No, thank you," Coral protested. Alexander snickered, neither noticing Marlin's sour expression. They all watched the realtor wave her arm across the green expanse, and in fact, the ferns and trees did resemble the ones which had been on the island in Jurassic Park. The shadows within the ferns suggested something unknown, lost, subliminally familiar. Marlin wanted to know it. It can be called a decline, a process, something nefarious in progress, parasitic. It manifested itself in the oddest of ways at first. At first seemingly unrelated, but it would make sense later on. How could it not be all connected? All intricacies like tacks on a map with yarn leading to one singular destination. The brain. Australia. Marlin started displaying grumpiness in the morning. He used to always make Coral a cup of coffee, but that stopped. Not all at once, though. He just became inconsistent. It was either that he forgot, or that his mind was elsewhere, or that he just stopped caring. It could not be the latter, because for all his life he was a family man. But why the sudden change? Marlin was sitting out back, having a beer one evening in the summer of 2021, while Coral was away on a girls' trip. Alexander had just driven home from his part-time job at Market Basket and came out back to see his father, consulting the blue sky. It was a pleasant blue that a painter would have picked, and there were few cotton clouds stringing themselves along the troposphere. There was evidence of birds in the rustling tree on the other side of the fence in the neighbor's yard, but the chickadees didn't dare fly out and disrupt the summer tranquility. But Marlin squinted out at all of this, as if it was wrong, as if the sky was supposed to be a different color. He spoke when he sensed his son's presence. "I wonder if the sky's a different color in Australia." His breath was cool with Michelob Ultra. Still in his market basket apron, Alexander didn't really know what to say while watching some kind of wonder go sour on his father's face. He watched his fingers play on the brown glass bottle, just a couple of sips left. Probably blue, Dad? You think? Yeah, I'd imagine. Marlin rubbed his lower face as if it would remodel his jaw, and the rearranging of bone and muscle would unlock some answer that the Massachusetts sky was gatekeeping from him. Can't be, he theorized, Alexander catching another whiff of Michelob Ultra on his breath. It's gotta be red, orange, all that desert and canyon down there. I betcha the environment affects the sky. Alexander took a seat in one of the lawn chairs. You think so? How many beers have you had, Dad? Instead of shrugging, Marlin tilted his beer. About 3. I got home from work early. Any cool new news stories? You know, it's slow in the summer. The Peabody Weekly News really loves making stories on the kids. And all the kids are out of school now, so not much academic achievements for us to spotlight. Oh, by the way, John and Meredith are coming in from England next week. Wanna come pick them up with me at Logan? Sure, Dad. When that day came, Marlin abstained from Michelob Ultra and drove into Boston with Alexander. You know, there's a bald eagle nest on one of these telephone poles, he told his son while doing 60 down a stretch of highway that cut over long stretches of marshland between Winthrop and Boston. It was a biome unbelonging in Massachusetts, and in the distance was the blue city of Boston, so unaware of the reeds that hid the foundation of a swamp. The only sign of civilization on this highway was the long history of telephone poles, wires with the posture of hammocks, going from pole to pole. And yes, one did have a bald eagle's nest on it. They got to Logan Airport, parked in the parking garage, and waited inside the area nearby baggage claim. All sorts of people passed in all sorts of directions, many on their phones dressed for business, many in Hawaiian t-shirts and sunburns, and many juggling patience and jet lag while stopping to wait at baggage claim. The slanted conveyor belt, which fed the passengers their suitcases, moved like a futuristic carousel. Both Marlin and Alexander executed careful examinations of each passenger's face when they stepped into baggage claim, but they didn't see their English relatives yet. But one distinctive voice caught Marlin's attention. The man spoke as though conducted by fate. "Oh, Darla, look at this! Would you just look at this? Go on, get in front of it, Darla!" It was a real-life Australian. At first, Alexander wondered why his father's face unsoured itself. He turned and watched it contort into bliss, as though his father was 6 years old and Mickey Mouse had just walked into the room. The Australian had a giant beer belly, a khaki vest over a red Hawaiian shirt, and a safari hat. There was a big camera in his hands, with a camera strap going over his neck. Darla, presumably the man's daughter, was the young red-haired girl posing in front of a poster for the New England Aquarium. The man snapped the picture, then consulted the camera and spoke with a triumph in his voice, as though triumph was just the everyday thing in Australia. "Blimey, now that's a ripper!" Something else caught the man's attention, and he started waddling over towards a cardboard cutout of a Boston Red Sox member, mid-swing. "Over here, Darla, over here!" "Nah, I gotta use the dunny," Darla complained, but she came to a stand in front of the cardboard cutout, where her father promptly snapped another picture. "Why, she'll be all right," he said, then consulted his camera again. "Oh, another ripper! Crikes! Look at that fella! Ain't he a fine streak of pelican shit?" Marlin was elated. "Hey!" Marlin said, running over to the father and daughter. "Want me to take a picture for you?" Alexander remained standing, while the Australian man with the beer belly took the camera off his neck and handed it to Marlin. The Australian was very pleased. "Blimey, you got some real ridgy dinge." "What part of Australia are you guys from?" Marlin asked after handing the camera back, to which the Australian answered, "We're from Barangaroo." Marlin put his hands on his hips, still elated. "Wow, Barangaroo! What a name!" They talked until John and Meredith came to get their baggage, and strangely, Marlin had seemed more excited to have seen the Australian and his daughter more than his own cousins. In fact, he seemed to be battling some inner agitation when the Australian and his daughter waddled away, snapping pictures en route to the exit of Logan Airport. Did Alexander remember that long ago 2013 night, while driving down that highway between Boston and Winthrop, with his dad's cousins in the back seat? Maybe he did while watching the telephone poles whipping by and by, connected by all those wires. One bald eagle's nest, like a cancerous impostor in the neural network of telephone poles. When the car whipped past the telephone pole with the bald eagle's nest, Alexander turned his head and looked at his father, to see him concealing some kind of sly bliss. He wished that the telephone poles would use their wires to make a net and stop the car. Why did he want the car to stop? He didn't know. He just looked away from his dad. At the end of that summer, Alexander found his dad incredibly disgruntled in the backyard after coming home from another shift at Market Basket, pacing amongst a litter of empty Michelob Ultra bottles that rolled around like empty shell casings from an artillery cannon. It looked as though he wanted to box the sky, beat it until it went red. He looked into his father's face, but couldn't discern if his father was disappointed at the bright blue color of the sky, or if he just didn't recognize it as if it wasn't how he remembered it. They had a fence instead of a lush backyard, a fence which he and Marlin had to repair almost every autumn. Alexander entered the backyard. His father turned around. "Dad, please don't go to Australia." Marlin looked into the sky again instead of responding to his son. Alexander could have said more, but he didn't, opting to go inside instead. It progressed from there. One could say that the nest managed to spread itself amongst the telephone poles in Marlin's mind. He started having trouble sleeping, waking up drenched in sweat after dreaming that he was in Australia. He would go on to tell Coral and Alexander his dreams at supper. "I'm outside on this patio," Marlin was explaining over the smells of grilled chicken and cold pasta salad. "And it's pouring. I mean, heavy pouring. But there's like this canopy roof over the patio, and I just know I'm in Australia. And I'm looking out into the bush, watching the ferns fan in the rain and breeze, and I feel like something's watching me from behind the trees." Coral and Alexander exchanged alarmed glances while Marlin held his fork above his chicken like a dignified knight holding their sword against the ground. "You've always had the weirdest dreams, honey," Coral said. Alexander wished his mother had said something different. "It just feels like a vision of my past life or something, you know?" Marlin mused. "Except it's like I'm living it right now, over there." Alexander looked at his mother, hoping she would say something else now, but she didn't. It happened on a day in late June 2023. Coral and Alexander woke up, and Marlin was nowhere to be seen. Marlin Darmody was still his dad, still Coral's husband. He was just somewhere else. The emotional reactions, arguments, police calls, police interviews, and whatnot can be skipped because there was only one clear conclusion to every question posed. Marlin Darmody had gone to Australia. At first, Coral didn't believe Alexander's theory, but she checked the bedroom drawers and only found her and Alexander's passports. Marlin's was missing. Suddenly, "Marlin is missing," the phrase which they had so liberally been throwing around, now settled down amongst them with a sinister context. Coral called the Peabody Weekly News to tell them that her husband probably wasn't going to be into work, and a few days later Marlin's picture showed up on the paper. "Peabody's own goes missing," read the headline above a picture of Marlin shaking hands with the mayor, Ed Betancourt. "How could he do this?" people asked. "Up and leave his family? Where could he have gone?" people asked. Was he abducted? Only one truly knew the answer, but wasn't going to say it. No one knows a man like his son does. Alexander Darmody put down the Peabody Weekly News while hearing his mother on the phone in the other room. Now, Alexander Darmody made sure not to dress like a tourist, and he certainly made sure to let his mother know where he was going. She understood immediately, and even more importantly, she trusted him. Remembering the name Barangaroo, he booked a flight that would take him to Sydney, which was close to Barangaroo. There were layovers, of course, and he napped on board while pretty flight attendants passed by without intruding on his dreams, if he was having any, and he got off the final plane with little luggage and a picture of his dad in his hand. Marlin was smiling so much in the photograph that it was hard to imagine he had had the misfortune of going missing, and the mania to let himself go missing. Alexander didn't hesitate. He started right there in the airport in Sydney. He even showed the photograph to passing flight attendants, holding up the photograph and pointing at it, asking, "Have you seen this man?" His search took him from hostel to hostel, resort to resort, where women in bikinis did little to distract him. All biological impulses to look were put aside. How carelessly they strutted by while he harassed the tiki bar bartender. "Has this man ever ordered a drink here? No? Well, have you ever seen him around?" Hostel to hostel, into the suburbs, into Barangaroo. His face was beginning to obtain a similar stubble to what his father used to grow. Alexander liked being well shaven, but he neglected that part in his hygiene routine while in Australia. Australia was hot, but the people were surprisingly human. They just had interesting accents, and none of them knew who Marlin Darmody was. Weeks later, with a full-on beard which turned out to be ginger, Alexander was driving in a rented jeep. His father's picture was tucked into the dashboard, corners flipping irregularly whenever wind snuck into the jeep. He had gotten tan since arriving, but his father hadn't changed. He was still goofily smiling in the photograph. He veered onto an empty highway that didn't cut through a desolate land, but disappeared into it. Along the side of the road which he drove on, there was one long, continuous parade of telephone poles, with their wires in wavy heart monitor fashion. He sped through the shadows that they cast. He looked out the passenger side window and saw a field of telephone poles, wires tangled up in the lowest part of the troposphere, sticking up like giant forks. It was like they made the earth a cyborg. It seemed as though they were hiding from the rest of the world. They were so marvelous and perfect in design, they did what they had to do. Alexander wondered how anything could ever go and build the nest on one of those. He remembered the night he and his dad walked beneath the telephone wires at home. Now he imagined his dad out there, lost, walking beneath Australian telephone poles and all their wires. Was Australia how he imagined it to be? Was he mad with joy underneath the confusing maps of wires? Neural pathways. Telephone wires. Alexander looked out at the field of telephone poles again and realized that they were the crops of man. They were planted and they grew, spreading curious vines like a cucumber plant. What would happen if they started to decline and not work anymore? Alexander looked back at the picture of his father and drove on. Stoic, tired face beneath his ginger beard. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last, wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men, who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men, near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.